So what I've come to understand is that the conventional culture of schooling, as we continue to practice and perpetuate it, which is 100 years old, is fundamentally and radically at odds with the culture of learning to be an innovator. There are 5 contradictions. Number 1, culture of schooling is all about celebrating and measuring individual achievement and measuring kids against one another. Problem is, innovation is a team sport. There is no real innovation without deep teamwork. Read Walter Isaacson's newest book about innovators to really understand how even people we thought did it all by themselves didn't. Knowing this, these teachers built accountable teamwork into every assignment they gave their teams of students, and they team taught whenever they could. Contradiction number 2 is we compartmentalize knowledge. You know, there's physics, chemistry, biology, and they live very far away from math, which is even further away from the humanities. A schema that goes all the way back to 1893 in the Committee of 10 who invented the Carnegie Unit, which is unchanged since 1893. And we favor specialization. But the problem is, innovation never happens within the constraints of individual academic disciplines. In fact, Judy Gilbert, Director of Talent at Google, said to me, if there's one thing educators must realize, is that problems can neither be understood nor solved within the bright lines of academic disciplines. Knowing this, these teachers built interdisciplinary courses that focused on a real problem or a complex open-ended question that did not have a right or wrong answer, but required multiple disciplines to understand. Contradiction number 3, the culture of schooling is so often a culture of passivity, of kind of sitting and getting, of consumption, and of even infantilization. So often you walk into many classrooms in America and what do you see? One person standing at the front of the room doing all the talking. And the purpose of the class is to transmit information, information which is almost never remembered after the test. By contrast, in these schools that teach innovation, what you see is an emphasis on students as creators, not consumers, students trying to understand complex problems that don't have right or wrong answers, students who are creating real products or solutions to problems for real audiences, students who are preparing real performances for real audiences, and the teacher sees his or her role as that of a coach, coaching to higher performance standards, and also someone whose job it is to empower students. Contradictions 4 and 5, I think, are the most challenging of all. Contradiction 4 is all about the F word, failure. Number 1 nightmare of American adults, not being ready for a test. Fear of failure is pervasive in our schools. Fear of failure creates a culture of compliance very often in classrooms. Guess what's on the teacher's mind? Fear of failure creates risk aversion most of all, for teachers as very much as often as for students. The problem is, innovation demands that you take risks, that you make mistakes, and that you fail. I went to IDEO, the most innovative design company in the world. Come to find out, their company motto is fail early and fail often. Other companies talk about failing fast, failing cheap, failing forward, but failing. Why? Because, in fact, innovation demands trial and error. There is no way of innovating without trial and error. I went to the D school at Stanford, talking about the whole problem of assessment. One teacher said, you know, I'm kind of thinking F is the new A. When I went to the brand new Olin College of Engineering, I talked to a young woman there. She said, you know, we're assessed on a body of work, not individual pieces. And often our classes are credit, no credit, so we don't even think about grades. She said, but we do obsess about iteration. My new favorite word, iteration, moving from 1.0 to 2.0. You know, from my point of view, there is no learning without, quote, failure, without trial and error. How do infants learn to talk? Trial and error. How do they learn to walk? Trial and error. How do you learn to ride a bike? What if you said to somebody, I'm sorry, you can't ride a bike unless you can do it perfectly. And we won't let you fall because you might skim your knee. None of us would be bike riders. We all have marks on our knee. It's inherent in the learning process. So we have to think about it differently, not as failure. The only failure I can really understand is the failure to not show up, to not try. Everything else from my point of view is iteration, is learning from your mistakes and applying what you've learned to your next effort or your initiative. And so the best schools and teachers assess students according to a body of work, not individual pieces, and they have a performance standard that they expect every student to meet. And it may take some students longer, or they may need more help, but the performance standard stays the same. You know, anybody want to fly with a C- airline pilot? Raise your hands. D+ dentist? That's how the best of the adult world works. You know, you don't have a certain amount of time in which to complete your pilot license. Yes, you have to have a minimum number of hours, but you have to demonstrate mastery to a performance standard. Same for a driving license or for orthopedics. So that's what happens in these classes. Last contradiction, about motivation. We rely far too heavily on extrinsic incentives to motivate learning, carrots and sticks. Punishment for bad grades, reward for good grades. The problem is, I discovered, or the exciting thing I discovered, not a problem, is that in every single case, these young innovators whom I interviewed, and many of the millennials, are far, far more intrinsically motivated. They don't do their best work to get an A. They do the work because it's interesting work to them. They don't take jobs to make a lot of money. They want to make a difference more than they want to make a lot of money. So I went back. I tried to understand, what have their parents and teachers done to encourage this intrinsic motivation? And I discovered another pattern. In every single case, both parents and teachers, again, from privilege as much as from poverty, had explicitly reinforced three things: play, passion, and purpose. Parents encouraged much more exploratory play, more time outside, fewer toys, toys without batteries, less programmed time. They limited screen time. Teachers tried to build kind of the spirit of playfulness into the curriculum. It was Ed Carrier, who teaches mechatronics to engineers at Stanford, who talked about bringing an element of what he called whimsy into every assignment he gave his teams of students. You know, as the kids grew older, the parents were very intentional about observing their children playing, trying to understand what engaged them, what motivated them. And to the extent that they were able, they tried to provide new opportunities for kids to explore new interests, discover new passions. Because, I discovered, they believed it was more important for young people to find and pursue a real interest that might become a passion than it was to be an academic achiever for its own sake. Because they believed, as do I, that it is in the pursuit of a real interest you develop this most important thing we call grit, tenacity, perseverance, self-regulation, self-discipline. Turns out, yes, you need 10,000 hours to become good at something, but 10,000 hours motivated by a tiger mom on your shoulder is not the same 10,000 hours as the one you impose on yourself. But it was interesting, because as these kids grew older, oh, I forgot, the teachers also, you know, they worried about keeping a spirit of curiosity and questioning alive. And so they quite intentionally created space in the curriculum for students to design their own projects, to ask their own questions, much like your mastery program or your fifth term here at Avenues, both of which I applaud. I think they're exceptional. But as these kids grew older, their passions morphed. They evolved. They didn't stay the same. And so what was interesting is that in every case, they matured to a deeper sense of purpose, a desire to in some way give back or make a difference. And that's because I discovered both parents and teachers had instilled one simple lesson, not necessarily religious, but it was boiled down to the idea that we are not here on this earth only to serve ourselves. We have some responsibility to give back, to make a difference, and to work to understand and empathize with people who are very different from ourselves.